Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Come on in here for the second half of the sessions here for the afternoon. And want to introduce some very important people that are going to be discussing the 2024 tourism forecast for this year, which everybody is involved with that, whether you think so or not. I know Brian Salazar with TAC1 is very keyed in on with the tourism numbers, but even Grant and people that come up. So it's important for all of our industry, seasonal and more in the wintertime as well. So we have Jenna Wright is going to be presenting. First of all, she is the president and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, which as we were just talking about, Anchorage is kind of the gateway to the whole state. So anybody that we see in Fairbanks or in Nuiqsut or Wainwright or Utqiagvik generally goes to Anchorage. So we appreciate your work you do there. And in support of her, as I'm calling the subject matter expert, the Director of Marketing and Development for the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, Ashley Ebnett. She's a Fairbanks girl. That's why I know I liked her, especially when I first met her. And then Jillian Simpson, who is the president and CEO of the Alaska Travel Industry Association. Known her for a long time. She came up as a young missionary, worked with the Alaska Sea Life Center in Seward, worked with the Alaska Travel Industry Association, and then is now, did you get your degree? Okay, well, she's an Arctic Studies major of some sorts at the University of Alaska system, but she's going to be bringing us information about specifically with the ATIA perspective. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Miss Jenna Wright to the stage. And
thank you so much for working. You guys hear me in the back? Okay, perfect. Well, as was mentioned, my name is Jenna Wright. I'm the president and CEO of the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, and I'm also just a lifelong Alaska resident. I have a background in the private sector, a little bit of state government, got all of my schooling here in Anchorage, and I've traveled all over the world, but I absolutely love this city and feel very fortunate to be in a role to be able to promote economic development. So for those of you that aren't familiar with AEDC, we were originally formed in 1987 as a municipal entity to help pull the city out of recession that was occurring at the end of the 80s as we saw oil prices collapsing. And so we were spun off 2 years later, and we have been existing as a private nonprofit for the last 36 years. Promoting economic development all throughout Anchorage. And we do that in a number of ways. One is that we conduct a lot of business intelligence and reporting that we make public to business leaders and community members such as yourselves. And we do public education on issues that the city is facing in forums like this. And then we also have a program to retain and attract businesses into Anchorage. So one of the major economic reports that we do each year is a look back on the previous year and then a forecast for what we're expecting in this year, and in some cases we forecast out a little bit more. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. We'll start by diving into some demographic trends. We'll look at 4 of Anchorage's industry sector pillars that are very important to our economy, and then we'll kind of wrap it up with the big picture and what that means for the future. So we'll start by just looking at kind of high-level macroeconomic trends of the people of Anchorage as we talk about our population, specifically our working age population and our employment base. So our 2023 numbers are officially in, and we stayed basically flat in 2023. We celebrated 3,600 new babies being born. We sadly lost 2,200 people due to deaths, and then we had another 1,700 people leave our state with this persistent net outmigration that we're continuing to experience. And so as we look ahead for the next 5 years, if nothing substantial changes in Anchorage, we do expect to see just a gradual decline in population of about 0.1% that represents about 200 people per year. And we do have, I'll say, some really exciting developments that are happening in Anchorage, whether that's federal infrastructure funding, private oil field investments that we'll talk about a little bit later, and a lot of private investment, like in our downtown area. And so all of those things are going to be bringing in new jobs, which is great news, but it's just not enough to kind of battle the demographics that we're experiencing right now. And then from an economic perspective, we're most often looking at the segment of the population that is our working age adult population. So these are people that are 16 to 64, prime working age adults. And this is really important for a community. You need a robust working age adult population so that we can experience economic growth and attract all the outside investment that is going to rely on a talented labor pool to run their operations. And so as you can see on this screen, we're facing major headwinds in this area, and we have for over a decade now. And then, the primary reason for this is that in the next 5 years, the baby boom generation is going to be completely retired. And the fact of the matter is that they just didn't have enough kids to be able to replace them. So now as we've got like Gen Z and the millennials who are in the workforce, there's just not enough of them to replace the retiring boomers. And so that is something that is not unique to Alaska or Anchorage. That's happening across the US. But what is more unique to Alaska is that we don't have a very good retention rate. There's a point in time study done for 2021 that shows that we have the second worst retention rate in the nation. And so those unfortunate statistics mean that nearly half of our population that was born here is just no longer here. So we'll talk some more about talent attraction and how important that is a little bit later on. But this number here really shows that we also need to be focusing on talent retention of our bright, talented young Alaskans that are graduating from high school. All right, so now we'll look at a smaller subset of the working age population, which is the number of employed workers in Anchorage. And this is an area that we're actually forecasting optimistic year-over-year growth because we are able to attract new workers in for some large projects that are going on in Anchorage. And so when we're looking at this employment growth, there's really two kind of benchmark years that we're trying to claw our way back to. The first is 2019, which is of course our pre-pandemic levels. And then the second is 2015, which was Anchorage's all-time job high. And then we entered a statewide recession from 2015 to 2018, where we were losing some jobs on the way to the catastrophe that was the pandemic. But since the pandemic, we have gained jobs every year since it hit, and we are forecasting another 1,400 jobs to be added to our economy in 2024. And some other very optimistic news is that based on the first 2 quarters of 2023 of wage and salary data, we actually saw job growth in pretty much all sectors, with the exception of government that lost 33 jobs, so it essentially stayed flat. And then the financial services industry lost about 200 jobs, and that is likely due to continued automation in that sector, as well as just having like a less desirable product, essentially, as the interest rate spikes continue to plague that kind of industry. And then one other important thing to note is that self-employment is not included in these numbers, but we did notice that from 2018 to 2022, that has grown by about 15% in Anchorage. So that's an interesting trend to take a look at. So now we'll take kind of a deeper dive into those 4 industries that are really foundations of the Anchorage economy. And we'll start by looking at one of Alaska's longest standing and most important industries, which is the oil and gas industry. And to measure the health of this industry, there are 2 key metrics that we look at. One is the overall production of Alaska North Slope crude oil, and then we also look at the price of a barrel of oil. And so we have seen some pretty volatile price swings in the last several years, especially after the Ukraine war began. But as you can see, production has remained relatively flat. And so 2023 ended with a pretty healthy average price per barrel of $82.60, but the pipeline saw the lowest annual throughput that it has seen since it became operational in 1977. So we are forecasting that over the next 2 years, production is going to stay relatively flat, but then as you can see, we really start heading into positive growth territory as 2 very large projects on the North Slope are going to come online. And those are, of course, ConocoPhillips' Willow project and then Santos's Pica project. The combination of those at peak production should give us another 260,000 barrels per oil per day in the in the Alaska pipeline. And so that's really going to offset some of those production declines that we're seeing in legacy fields. And then another piece of good news is that for the first time in the last 8 years, we actually saw employment growth in the oil and gas sector in Anchorage. We saw an increase of 50 jobs in 2023, and then we are forecasting that we're going to see another 50 jobs in 2024. And while that might not seem like very much to have 1,600 jobs in a particular sector, the oil and gas industry has the highest multiplier effect out of any other industry in Alaska. So for every one direct job that you see here on the screen, there's an additional 15 jobs that are being supported by the private industry in Alaska because of oil and gas. So the total economic impact of this industry results in about $6 billion in wages across the state, which really highlights the kind of outsized effect that oil and gas has on our state and our city here in Anchorage. So next we'll look at another vital industry for Anchorage, which is the transportation industry. And this, of course, is comprised primarily of transportation jobs over at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport, the Port of Alaska, and then also just through a robust network of logistics companies that are taking freight throughout our city and our state. And these last few years have been excellent for this industry. Just at the airport alone, 1 in 7 jobs in Anchorage are supported because of the airport. And in 2022, I'm sure it's no news to this room, but Anchorage vaulted past Shanghai to become the 3rd largest cargo air hub in the entire world. And that's really thanks to our strategic position here on the globe, where we're 9 hours away from 90% of the industrialized world. And so that global position makes us a very attractive refueling stop for primarily Asian cargo flights that are bound for North America. And in 2021, air cargo volume transiting the airport hit a record high of 3.65 million metric tons. And that was primarily fueled by increased consumer spending during the pandemic. And as you'll note, volumes did decline slightly in 2022 and 2023 as compared to that very record year, but they still remain higher than in any other year prior to 2021. So for the coming year, we're forecasting stabilized volume with modest growth as we see our supply chains continue to adjust to pre-pandemic patterns. And we do have some exciting developments underway. We've got FedEx's new sorting facility on the airport, and then offsite we have the new Amazon distribution facility that's already added about 100 jobs to our economy here in Anchorage. We expect that number to increase over the coming years. And then of course there's Northlink Aviation's $200 million cargo facility as well, which is bringing even more infrastructure into Anchorage and really solidifying our place as a global player in the cargo industry. The Port of Alaska is another really important component of Anchorage's overall transportation industry, and our preliminary estimates show that we broke another record in 2023 with 5.3 million tons of cargo volume that transited our docks. And so in 2024, we expect that shipping through the port is going to continue at these historically high volumes, even as demand for consumer good is starting to stabilize. We've got a lot of construction projects that are in our state right now, and we're seeing a very strong cement demand that's transiting the Port of Alaska docks to support those projects. In fact, in 2023, our cement demand levels were about 50% higher than they were in 2022. Okay, so what do all those new developments and record-breaking numbers mean for employment? Well, I'm very happy to report that we are continuing to break records in that arena as well. In the last decade, we've grown about 20% in jobs in this particular industry, and we're up 400 jobs from just last year, and then we're forecasting another growth year in 2024 of an additional 200 jobs in the transportation sector, especially as we see the opening of these new facilities like FedEx and Amazon. And then sticking with an industry that kind of relies on our transportation infrastructure, we'll take a look at the visitor industry specific to Anchorage. And Jillian's going to talk a lot about like statewide travel metrics, but I'll just briefly touch on what this means for the Anchorage economy. So 2023 was another fantastic year for Anchorage's tourism, which is a really vital piece of our economy. We just were at the Visit Anchorage membership luncheon a couple hours ago, and they reported that 1 in 9 jobs in Anchorage are related to the visitor industry. So very, very important for jobs in our economy. And it's also a really important place for us to collect revenues to run city government here in Anchorage. So we have about $60 million of estimated tax revenues that came in last year, and that's a combination between bed taxes, RV, and rental car taxes that go into the state that are primarily paid for by tourists. And then, of course, it drives hundreds of millions of dollars at local businesses and spending, that is. And so in 2023, we saw really, really strong convention center and meeting attendance, which is indicating a rebound in business travel, while we start to see this like post-pandemic travel frenzy start to kind of subside. But that said, you know, the baby boom generation that is in the process of retiring or has recently retired still has Anchorage in its crosshairs as a bucket list destination. And like we sometimes hear it called the international destination within the United States, if you will. And so that's really great for us. It bodes well for us to kind of keep demand stable and even modestly growing into 2024 with a forecasted 5.7 million air passengers after this year's already 5% increase. Cruise ships are another important way that visitors enter our state from ports in Whittier, Seward, and then occasionally Anchorage. I think we're going to have 3 ships docking in Anchorage this year. And then obviously we've got, you know, 0 passengers in 2020 and 2021, which was a disaster. But 2023 was a year that this travel modality really rebounded. And then we're expecting to see another 12% in increased capacity for 2024 as cruise lines are increasing their Alaska dedicated capacity. So this is really great for us. And then in terms of employment, we've got kind of conflicting factors on this forecast. On one hand, I just talked about how strong the tourism industry is. We've got the Aviator Hotel that's being built downtown Anchorage. We've got Candlewood Suites in Midtown. And all of these things are adding jobs to the economy, which is really a good thing. But on the flip side, the J-1 visa worker program that this industry really relies on has not quite bounced back to what we were seeing pre-pandemic. So as you kind of add those things in, we are expecting to see another 500 jobs added to the economy next year, and that will put us just right below our 2019 pre-pandemic levels, and then we'll grow from there in 2025. The next sector is the construction industry. We've got some good news and some bad news associated with the construction industry in Anchorage. So building permits are expected to finish the year nominally higher in 2023 than they were in 2022 at $515 million. And then we expect this other nominal increase of about $5 million in 2024 as well. But after you factor in inflation, that's really either stable or more likely a decrease. On the commercial side, we've got a lot of folks that are entering into 2024 with a very large backlog of work. And then they've got billions of dollars of federal infrastructure funding that is looking them in the face for the coming years. And so all of that's really good. But the speed at which we can complete these projects is going to be limited by a severe worker shortage in not only the construction industry, but also the design and engineering and architecture industry that really they all cohesively work together. So that is one thing to consider. And we're also still facing pretty long lead times in terms of materials, which is slowing down projects as well. And then so here we're looking at residential housing units built in Anchorage by type. And there's really no way to sugarcoat the fact that this is a crisis for Anchorage. Last year we reported that 402 units had been built in 2022, and that was nowhere near enough supply to meet the demand that we had for housing in Anchorage. And then we were really, really disappointed to see that we only built 211 units in 2023. And so that's about half of what the last 7 years has been on average for building in Anchorage. And as I just mentioned, you know, there's all these industries that are relying on talent here in Anchorage. There's no way we're going to be able to attract talent if we don't have the housing to place these people in. So this is an area that we really, really need to support new housing development in Anchorage if we're going to be able to retain and attract the workforce that we need for our economy to grow and prosper, especially as we're in this very fierce national competition for talent. And then so in terms of construction employment, the increase in building permit values and the boom in federal infrastructure funding, it means that local employers are seeing increased demand for their services and they are adjusting their hiring accordingly. So we're reporting that we saw 300 additional construction jobs last year, and we're expecting to see another 300 jobs in 2024. And this is an industry where we're finally above our 2019 milestone of pre-pandemic jobs, but we're still about 7% down from the 2015 levels, which was our all-time high in this particular industry. And I will say there's room for a lot of growth in this industry if we can just find the workers to meet employer demands. So now taking a look at residents' purchasing power and their overall sentiment towards the Anchorage economy, given all that economic context. Personal income in Anchorage continues to rise at a very consistent, steady rate. And so we're forecasting that in 2023, we ended the year with $22.7 billion. That's made up of about 60% of income from work, 20% investment income, and then 20% is payments from the government, which includes Social Security, and then unique to Alaska, the PFD. And then in 2024, we're expecting that this growth will continue with $23 billion in personal income. Okay, and so we had a great year for personal income, but what eats away at personal income? And that would be inflation. And we've sure had a wild ride when it comes to inflation the last couple of years. We peaked at 8.1% in 2022. 2023 came down to 3.1%. And then we're forecasting that inflation will continue to decline even further in 2024, which will give us some relief from the previous years that we've had. Okay, and then so one of the things that we do on a quarterly basis, and on this slide I've aggregated it up to 2023, but like how are consumers feeling about the economy given all of that context that I just gave? Well, they're not really feeling very great. Numbers between 55 and higher is considered optimistic. Numbers below 45 are considered pessimistic, and then from 45 to 55, that is kind of like we're not sure territory. We don't really know what we feel. And so as you look at the local economic confidence, we are just kind of in neutral territory. Personal financial confidence, which is typically our highest indicator on this survey that we've done for the last 15, 20 years, has just recently gone into neutral territory. Typically, that's our most optimistic measure. And then our future expectations are markedly bleak, which is pretty interesting. And so all three of those come together to form the Consumer Optimism Index, which is just slightly in negative territory. And so this is kind of a conundrum for economists across the US right now, actually, because this isn't really unique to Anchorage. They're seeing all these positive economic indicators that I just went over, but consumers just aren't feeling great. And so that conundrum is probably best explained by the fact that we just went through years of high inflation. And so while inflation's back to normal now, that doesn't mean that prices have gone back down to where they were in 2019 and 2020. And so consumers are experiencing that, and it's kind of putting them in a negative light. Oops. Okay, so this is my last slide. Where does all this news leave us? In general, we're forecasting that 2024 is going to be a really, really great year for the Anchorage economy. We, like I just mentioned, are seeing lower inflation, we're seeing higher personal income, and we are going to see job growth in pretty much all sectors across the Anchorage economy in 2024. So if you have kids that are graduating high school or college, or just if you know someone that wants to try a new job right now, there are an abundance of employers across Anchorage that are able and willing to hire these folks. In fact, we have about like 2 to 3 jobs for every one person seeking work right now. So it's a great time to be looking for a new job in Anchorage, but that fact is also going to kind of inhibit our ability to grow the economy as well. And our primary concern is going to be our population demographics. We are aging and we're becoming more dependent on fewer workers in the economy. And as I mentioned earlier, about half of our Alaska-born citizens are eventually leaving the state. So it is I would say more important now than it's maybe ever been to focus on talent retention and attraction efforts here in Anchorage. We've got billions of dollars coming our way from private oil field projects, private investment in our city, and then also the public federal infrastructure dollars. And so we really can use all of those elements to create this foundation that we really launch ourselves into economic growth and prosperity for decades to come, as long as we're very intentional about attracting the workforce that we need to support that economy. All right, so that concludes AEDC's 2024 Economic Forecast presentation, and it is now my pleasure to turn it over to Jillian to give some more tourism context to the conversation.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? All right, awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you, Jenna. That was great information about Anchorage's economy and the visitor industry, and it's really nice to see that this will dovetail nicely with what you've said, and it doesn't contradict it, so that's always good. I'm Jillian Simpson. I'm the president and CEO of the Alaska Travel Industry Association, and I'm pretty stoked to be here with you all today, so thank you for the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about who we are and in the travel industry in Alaska and what we're seeing for the future here. So I just want to start by sharing a little bit of who we are and what we do. So ATIA is essentially the membership organization for the travel industry. We're a trade association. We have about 600 members statewide, and we have 24 board members that are elected by our membership. And there's a little bit of crossover between your board members, one here right now, and our board members. So it's really nice to be able to have the air carriers represented on the ATIA board. We also just designated a new seat on our board for an Indigenous person to make sure that cultural tourism always has a seat at the table and is represented by all decisions that ATIA makes. So we're really proud of that. Our goal and our mission is to ensure a healthy and vibrant travel industry in Alaska, and we do that through advocacy, education, and destination marketing. And I just want to highlight a couple of the programs that we offer through the association. One is the Alaska Host Training, that is a free customer service training that we offer to frontline employees, but we also offer a Train the Trainer, so that anybody in your business can become certified and then conduct the customer service training. And we know that that has become more and more important post-pandemic, is making sure that our workforce has the customer service skills that we want to provide in the hospitality industry. And in fact, there's actually a training that's coming up at the end of the month, so we welcome your participation in that. We also administer the Adventure Green Alaska program, which is a voluntary certification for tourism businesses who have met certain criteria to show that they are working towards environmental, economic, and sociocultural sustainability. And the program is also designed to educate and help tourism businesses achieve some of those goals. We've been working on this, I think the program was formed in 2008, and right now we're going through a process of trying to elevate those standards so that they align with the Global Sustainable Tourism Council's standards, and I'm really excited about that because it'll really make us a world-class sustainability destination by doing that. And then lastly, we administer the state of Alaska's destination marketing program. So we receive an annual grant from the state of Alaska to execute the tourism marketing program on all of your behalf. And it is administered, again, by the private sector. When we work very closely in conjunction with the Department of Commerce, Community, and Economic Development in determining what the program is going to be and then facilitating that. So I wanted just to talk a little bit more about what we do and why we do that. Of course, destination marketing is critical to drive consumer demand for people to want to visit Alaska. And the way that we want to do that is not only to bring more people here, but also to encourage them to spend more time, spend more money, and visit more communities. There are a lot of travel barriers when it comes to perceptions about coming to Alaska. I think it's on a lot of people's bucket list, but we are also competing against other world-class destinations. And as Jenna mentioned, we're perceived as an international destination, even though we are domestic. It's perceived as very complicated to plan for. You need a lot of time, and you do need to have more of a disposable income than just any other type of traveler. And so those type of barriers can be overcome by beautiful and compelling marketing messaging that can make an emotional connection with consumers and get them to choose Alaska over Iceland or Norway or New Zealand or even Seattle, I guess, right? Like, we don't want to lose our visitors to them. And it's increasingly competitive. So the more messaging that we can have in the marketplace, the more consumer demand that we can drive to come visit Alaska year round. These are some examples of some of our different campaigns. We do a national advertising campaign, and plus we do public relations campaign going out to media all over the lower 48. We produce a vacation planner. I don't know how many years we've been producing that, but it's been for a very, very long time. And new in the last couple of years, we've put a lot more emphasis on cultural tourism. So we have a cultural guide all about Alaska Native people in Alaska and how to learn more about them and make that part of the overall Alaska visitor experience. Our campaign the last couple of years has been the Also Known As campaign, and it is an award-winning campaign. So we are really, really proud of that. In the last few years, we've had a healthy tourism marketing budget that has allowed us to really be present in the marketplace, both nationally and internationally. Now that international travel is coming back, we have a handful of key markets that we like to have a presence in particular to support those nonstop flights coming over from Germany. So definitely Europe is an important market for us, as well as Australia. And we're looking to see if Asia's coming back. Certainly India is. So my colleague is actually there right now on a sales mission to promote Alaska travel. Yeah, so she is on the other side of the world. So these are some of the examples of that campaign. And I did want to just highlight, since I'm here at the air carriers, that we also do some out-of-home marketing in addition to television, broadcast, and magazine, print placements, obviously a lot of digital. But we have some placements in the SeaTac airport. This is Concourse C. So we've got two beautiful images of Alaska, encouraging people to just fly right on up. It's super close if you're already in Seattle. So that'll be running, I think, until the end of this month. We also had a video running, excuse me, I'm losing my voice, in Times Square too. Again, so these are high traffic areas where lots of travelers are, to just bring a lot of, thank you. I don't know if the rest of you have been getting sick this week. I feel like it's been happening, excuse me. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about who our visitors are. In 2022, we decided to do a comprehensive research study of our visitors. And unfortunately, well, we wanted to do the study post-pandemic to kind of recalibrate where we were. Unfortunately, 2022 wasn't necessarily the type of year that was representative of our travelers that we typically have. It was a little bit of an anomaly. It was definitely a lot of the so-called revenge travel was happening, where people suddenly were free to come back and get back into airplanes and travel and spend that pent-up money and get out of their homes finally. And so we saw a lot of that, in particular on the independent travel side. The cruise industry was slowly coming back at that time. It definitely was not at capacity in 2022. So while we feel like these are good indicators of where we were coming out of the pandemic, they're probably not completely representative of our typical travelers, but it's a good indicator. So some of the interesting findings that came out of that were that our visitors' average age has actually decreased in the last few years. So it was in the mid-50s. We were seeing those, they were I don't know, it's 48's not a boomer anymore, right? We're not boomers, are we? Okay, Gen X now is the average age of our travelers. So for all of Gen X people, we're coming into our own, we can be acknowledged finally, right? Nobody ever talks about us. So that's been the change. Household income has, the average household income for visitors to Alaska has always been over $100,000 per household, and this in 2022 is about $117,000. So certainly travelers to Alaska have a disposable income. About 3/4 of them are married or partnered. 80% are Caucasian or white. A third of the visitors in 2022 actually had children in the household. And I think that that is something that we've been seeing a trend of multi-generational travel and people traveling with families and wanting to spend time with each other. And certainly coming out of COVID, that has become more and more of a value. So seeing more children coming to Alaska than we had in the past. One thing I wanted to point out was accessibility, that 16% of our visitors have some type of accessibility need. And I just was at a conference that was talking about that 1 in 5 travelers in the world has some kind of disability. And it's really a market and something that we don't necessarily talk about. And it's very important that we not only accommodate that, but also are marketing to those people and letting them know that we are accommodating that and we're an accessible travel destination. And then about 7% of the visitors in our survey anyway identified as LGBTQ. Some other interesting factors. Why do people come to Alaska? We've always talked about mountains, glaciers, and wildlife are the draw for our destination. And you can see that reflected here. Scenic beauty is number one, nature, wildlife, but also being able to see and experience Alaska Native cultures. Satisfaction rating, it's so cool. We've always done this. We're so nice and wonderful and hospitable people. So there's a high satisfaction rating for their time here and also for their likelihood to recommend to travel back to Alaska, and their likelihood to return is 82% from our 2022 visitors. So really, really positive numbers that way. When you come here, as we all know, it's awesome and you fall in love with it and you want to tell people and come back. We also did a little bit of a study asking, what were the things that you did while you were in Alaska? And the number one thing was eating local cuisine. Although this number cracks me out because it's only 68%. So like, what is everybody else eating? Like, are they just going to McDonald's, right? I think it should be higher. So you can see it's a very long list. It goes all the way down to ziplining. Visiting the Arctic Circle is on there, of course, viewing the Northern Lights. But I did want to point out about halfway down the list is sightseeing excursions by plane, is what our researchers call it. We all know that it's flight seeing. And of course, that number is about 13% of all of our visitors actually book a flight seeing trip. We know that they're also flying on planes for other activities and to do other things, but they're not necessarily thinking of it as flight seeing. So I know that that number is certainly higher. Alaska is a multimodal travel destination. So people, when they come here, typically aren't only using one form of transportation, and they're definitely not staying in one community. So they are traveling around the state, and we all know we don't have that many roads, and so boats and planes are the way to get around. But if you break that number down, that 13%, it's pretty interesting. 9% of our independent travelers, our non-cruise travelers, will take a flight seeing tour. 16% of our cruise visitors will book a flight seeing tour, and 29% of our visitors that are on a guided group are taking a flight seeing tour. So it's really interesting and important that those that are organizing group tours are the ones that are definitely smart enough to know to book a flight seeing trip as part of their tour itinerary. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economic impact that we saw in 2022. So previous years, we've done this study, and these are real numbers from those years. They haven't been adjusted for inflation. But in 2016, the last time we did this study, per person, per trip, people spent around $1,000. That has increased to almost $1,500 in 2022. And as you remember from Jenna's slide, and we all know and experienced it, that there was a huge increase in inflation, but even accounting for that, people are spending more money, and certainly prices have gone up. So that has resulted in a whopping $3.9 billion in direct spending by visitors, which results in a $5.6 billion economic impact. So tourism has a huge, huge impact and is a significant part of Alaska's economy. And it's about 50,000 jobs. Obviously that number has varied, and we certainly were challenged with the workforce, as you all know, in 2022 when this study was done, but still a significant number. We are waiting next week, so if you had scheduled this 1 week later, I could actually give you real visitor numbers for last year, for 2023, but we don't have them yet. But we do have indicators that give us a sense of what visitation looked like last year. And we looked at 4 different modes of transportation to the state. So on the far left is cruise, and the blue line is the 2022 numbers. The green line is 2023. So we have cruise, airline. That is my interpretation of somebody driving an RV. And then the last one is a ferry. So you can see, obviously, that the cruise number went up significantly from 2022 to 2023. In fact, it was the record-breaking year for cruise passengers to the state. As Jenna mentioned, that number is going to remain flat for 2024. It's stabilizing over the next few years. It looks like a pretty significant jump from 2022 to 2023, and certainly going back during COVID time when we didn't have any, it was a big jump. But if we had extended this timeline out previously to 2017, 18, 19, the trajectory of cruise growth at that time would follow a nice, a shallow incline. So it looks like a big jump, but it probably wouldn't have been if we didn't have the pandemic as a disruptor. But 1.6 million travelers is pretty exciting. It makes up about 60% of all travelers and summer travelers to Alaska are cruise passengers. Air travel, you can see these are just passenger numbers, so they do include residents right now, and that's what we're filtering out, is to get a more specific number that is just air travelers that were visitors and not residents. So both of those numbers are apples to apples of visitors and residents, and it's about 1.9 million. And it looks, there was a slight increase in 2023, but when you start to think about who of the visitors would be on those planes, it's going to include those cross-Gulf cruisers that Jenna talked about, right? So about 1/3, actually I think it's about 28% of all the cruises that come to Alaska cross the Gulf of Alaska and come into Seward or Whittier, and then give their passengers access to land tours in Alaska. The rest of them are staying in the Inside Passage and supporting those communities down there. So those passengers that cross the Gulf are only on a one-way cruise, and so they need to get on an airplane to either begin their cruise or end their cruise. So that big increase in cruise passengers is also going to be an increase in air passengers too, and not necessarily reflective that the independent traveler also grew at the same rate. So we're expecting the independent traveler number to have come down from 2022. Border crossings were up though, so that was really cool to see, although they obviously make up a pretty small percentage of our overall visitors. And ferry went down just a little bit. And certainly I think the visitor industry is anticipating and excited that there will be some investment in the Alaska Marine Highway System, which I think will give some consistency and ability for travelers to plan and book coming back up that way. We used to have about 4% of our visitors would come up by ferry. So this is a complete wag because I don't have the final numbers, but it's just a way to give you an understanding of how all of our visitors come throughout the year. So the segments in green are going to represent summer. So definitely the vast majority of our visitors are coming in the summertime. Although winter is growing and continues to grow and has been doing really well, that piece of the pie is getting bigger for winter because that is growing at a faster rate than the summer increase, which is really cool to see. If you talk to people in Fairbanks or even in Anchorage, they will report that their hotel revenue bed tax numbers in the winter time now, which are more months than summer, but are now comparable to, and may even have exceeded summer numbers. I know March in Fairbanks generates more bed tax than June in Fairbanks. So winter is a very important and viable and growing time of year for our visitors, which is super cool to see. And then looking again, you can see about half of our visitors are traveling by cruise, and then half are independent travelers coming either in summer or winter. So I just want to talk a little bit about some trends for 2024. As Jenna said, we were just at the Visit Anchorage lunch, and Julie Sape, the president of Visit Anchorage, was talking about coolcations. I call them cooler vacations. I think we're cooler, but coolcations, it's this trend because it's so hot now in the lower 48 that travelers are looking to places they can go to cool down. And so some of that trend is being reflected in them wanting to travel in shoulder seasons to, more typical summer destinations, but we already are super cool year round. And so it gives us a good position and something to capitalize on, to remind people that, that it's refreshing when they come here in the summertime and that they're not gonna swelter and be super hot. Wellness travel is obviously a growing trend. Sustainability continues to be a priority for travelers. I know a lot of travelers talk about it being important and they don't necessarily act on it, but tour operators are definitely reporting that there is more motivation and buying power behind that now. And so again, it's an important thing that we want to put emphasis on and support businesses in Alaska to be able to showcase that they are operating sustainably. Active travel and slow travel, if you heard about this, just kind of hanging out in a destination instead of like bouncing around a lot and really getting to know a community and having a more authentic experience by being able to do that. So all of those, I think, bode well for Alaska. These are just general trends happening right now. Our projections for this coming visitor season, well, I guess we're in visitor season right now because we are year round, right? For our coming summer visitor season, Matt is definitely correcting me with his eyes. But I think this summer will bode well for us. We are definitely experiencing strong winter visitation right now, which is definitely a good indicator. So people are traveling right now and they're willing to spend more money and travel to interesting, somewhat exotic destinations. I already mentioned that the cruise passenger numbers are not going to continue to increase. They'll be flat, but that's still a very high number for us. The domestic economy is very good. There's a lot of positive indicators for it. As Jenna mentioned, consumers haven't really recognized that, although I just read that, like, I think the other day that the consumer confidence has gone up. And so that definitely bodes well for us, because when people feel good about their financial situation, they feel like they have a disposable income, and that's when they'll invest in travel. And so that is a good thing for leisure travel and for us. Global air travel is predicted to set a record globally, worldwide, that the demand for air travel just continues to increase, which also is really great news. So we'll see how that pans out for Alaska, certainly. And tied to that is that international has opened up completely. All of the travel restrictions that we had seen before, for the most part, especially from our key markets, are all gone now, and people have the ability. It's much easier for them to travel. So the good news is that the international market is coming back to Alaska. They typically make up about 10% of our overall visitation, so they're very important. The bad news is that international markets have opened back up. So the same people that we're competing with to bring to Alaska are also saying, hey, I can go to Europe now, or I can go to Iceland, or all of our competing destinations and places that have stronger marketing budgets. So we have to watch out for that. And then what I've been hearing, and this is all anecdotal, is that bookings are kind of all over the place depending on who you talk to. Cruise lines in particular, though, are reporting strong bookings right now. This is wave season, and it looks really positive for them. And Jenna mentioned that the cross-Gulf cruises are increasing, and that's because the capacity is probably about the same as last year, but they'll be able to fill those ships completely. So that is going to be really good news and is a good indicator for us. Some independent operators are saying that things are a little bit softer, that some of their blocks haven't materialized yet. It's still too soon to tell what the summer is going to look like, but there are some indicators that we're kind of watching to see how things are going to play out over the summertime. Certainly with the independent traveler, I think we're going to see some variability with that. Again, I don't know we'll ever get back to that high that we had in 2022 with them. So that concludes my presentation, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Stand by.
I've been reading that there's going to be a required visa for Europe by 2025 for anyone traveling to Europe. Do you think that that's an opening for more people to come to Alaska?
Yeah, for sure it would be. Yeah, they're definitely a competing destination for us. So anything that is a barrier to get to a destination, bad for the destination, good for their competitors.
Right, yeah. Go for it.
Cool. We'll go support that. We'll
I
advocate
just
for
wanted to say with the cultural tourism, that really buys well for everybody in here. So even Dan with Grant, if you want to go to a village, you're going to go with Grant out of the 100,000 villages you go to. So I think that's really important to think about. And also, as far as workforce, the better that we have a place that's fun to visit, it's going to be better for people to live. Right, on your point. And I think that was it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, Jillian. Appreciate it. Okay, everybody, just want another quick round of applause, please, for those folks. Okay, our next presentation are two folks you'll recognize. We have Joanne Ford of the FAA and Alex Siebold of Flight Tech.